Hey, welcome back, y'all. Today, we're talking about how Gibby has over-centralized the Apex metagame over the last couple of seasons.
Is a Gibby necessary? Do we need one?
1000% you need to get it.
His abilities are too good.
So, I don't mean to say that Gibby is overpowered in the way that Wraith, for example, was when she could do her instant Q. This is something that tends to happen in every competitive endeavor in general. People find something that works consistently, and they use it and use it and use it until somebody finds a way to deal with it, or nobody finds a way to deal with it, and they decide to use it too. So this happened last year on Pokemon Showdown, actually, with a Pokemon called Dracovish. And nathanlikeschicken has a video about this exact topic dealing with Dracovish specifically, who wasn't exactly OP, but he was extremely over-centralizing. And I'll let that play for a sec.
When a Pokemon maybe isn't necessarily overpowered and destroying the metagame, but instead shifting or warping the metagame around it, making it the centerpiece of most games and team builds, then it's so centralizing so as to be detrimental. Once again, we call it over-centralizing. So you can see how Dracovish was a similar case. It didn't matter that its answers were common Pokemon. Any Pokemon metagame that forces you to have a specific Pokemon in it to remain competitive is really against the spirit of the game, limiting your team building and your creativity. Not to mention it also affects how you even play the game, let alone build teams.
So let's take this concept and apply it to Apex. In a hero shooter in general, but in Apex more specifically, each character represents a different player base and a different playstyle. So having a wide pool of viable characters is important for the health of the game. Whereas having the community centralize around a single character pick, whether it's the best or not, is kind of against the spirit of the game. If you watched the last ALGS, there was a little bit of hype at the beginning about the new legend, Valkyrie, coming into the picture in the Apex metagame at the highest level. But unfortunately, as the games went on, we just saw a lot of Gibby, and the hype about Valkyrie started to die down, after the 5th or 6th bubble fight ending. And so the message from the past few seasons has been pretty clear. Gibby is not just a good legend. He is the dominant strategy that you should be expecting and planning for in 3v3 engagements, period. So I think it is fair to say that Gibby is over-centralizing the Apex metagame. So I guess the first question to ask is really, is this unhealthy for the game at its core? And here's what I mean by that. So if you had this conversation a few seasons ago, you would be talking about Wattson and Caustic and how the bunker meta has over-centralized Apex Legends around camping in buildings. And you'd be right. That was the case. And so to get out of that, they did buff Gibby so much that he's become this dominant force. When you're playing in an organized setting and you can't afford to risk the victory, the stakes on RNG, like the ring, then you want someone who's versatile and reliable, and that's really what Gibby brings to the table, where Wattson and Caustic may be more powerful indoors. If they don't have that in the last ring, then they just kind of lose, because Gibby is strong outside. And so this push was really good for the game. Like, it meant that people were outside more often, rotating more in more risky ways, and able to recover from rotations more easily if they got punished, because Gibby could do that for them, whereas Caustic and Wattson couldn't. But you fast forward a few seasons, and you get to here, where every single fight in ALGS is a bubble fight. So while it was good for the game for a minute, what is it doing to the game now? I think that's the most obvious effect of Gibby being so strong, is that the other defensive legends just don't keep up. But that isn't just bad for Wattson and Caustic. That's also bad for Pathfinder, for example, who used to be a meta staple and is no longer quite as strong. In fact, we basically don't see him at all anymore. So yeah, while it did have the effect of replacing a strategy that the community ended up not really enjoying that much, that process has also left characters behind. And in that same light, it's also rewarded characters that I'm not going to say they don't deserve it. It's just like they are so specific and niche to this scenario that they have to be better because Gibby is better. And so, for example, Pathfinder didn't really make it out of that meta, but Wraith did. Pathfinder doesn't really combo that well with Gibby, but Wraith certainly does. So Wraith, a character that has always been a meta staple, top tier, must pick, gets a little additional buff by the fact that her homie Gibby is also good and basically a must pick. And then the implications go out even further, actually. So I think, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think a lot of people will agree that Bloodhound is pretty consistently better than Crypto, but Crypto brings the EMP to the table. The EMP is basically the only thing in the game that you can do to deal with the Gibby bubble. And so in any meta that features Gibby heavily, Crypto will at least be looked at. Maybe as a niche pick, maybe as a counter pick, but it works, you know? People do play him. And so to some degree, it's like, yes, it does add diversity, and I'm a fan of that. But it also asks people to lose a bit of utility and you know, an extra gun in a fight sometimes to get that Crypto versus a Bloodhound. Which again goes to the point that Gibby's not exactly overpowered, he's just over-centralizing the metagame and requiring a certain level of management and team building. And before I move on, I just want to say, like, each of these legends represent like a different playstyle and a different section of the player base. So it's like this disproportionate value does hurt the metagame. It hurts the strategies. It hurts the playstyles of the community, not just the legends that you're allowed to play. In any competitive metagame, an over-reliance like this is a recipe for a stale metagame. So let me go ahead and expand on that. In Apex, the reliance on the bubble reduces creativity in pushing and in defense. Often, you'll just think, oh, it's a 3v3 if we can just drop the bubble on them, so we'll just bubble fight. Or like, hey, we just got pushed, but we can just bubble fight, and we can't get third-partied, or we can't get shot by their friend who's on the rock. Or they got high ground, I'll just airstrike them, and then we can bubble fight them down here. Or like it's the last ring, we can just wait it out, and then we can bubble fight at the end. Some of your strats will rely on the passive, and some of them will rely on the ultimate, but like 90% of the time, it's just, we're going to bubble fight them. I'm going to press Q, we bubble fight, period. And like, that is fine to some degree, right? I liked the Winston meta too, guys, you know? But Apex doesn't work exactly like Overwatch. In Overwatch, I'm totally cool with a character being a one-use tool. They've got a ton of different characters, and you can change whenever you want, so it's not a super reductive gameplay to have a character that you just get on so you can do the Death Blossom once. But Apex doesn't have any respawns or legend swaps. And this game has the crispiest movement and gunplay in any shooter ever. So like, it just feels very reductive to have so much reliance on just wiggling the shield in this game. And that really wasn't always how the game was played. Now, I did not make this video just to complain. I do want to talk a bit about how we could fix this and, you know, how we've fixed things like this in the past. Because it's really not as easy an answer as any of the previous meta issues in this game. So in the Pokemon example from earlier, Dracovish just got banned from the A tier. They put him in the S tier and then they were like, that's that, call it a day. But we can't really do anything like that in Apex. So I think in a lot of situations like this, Respawn likes to do their classic, you know, power meddling, right? Like they either add a character in that deals with some of the problems, or they nerf the characters that exemplify the problems, right? So when the Watson meta was so huge, they decided to take away the permanence of her trophy, which was a really good play, honestly. She was too reliant on dropping the trophy and just staying there forever. And when Caustic was too meta, they dropped his damage from the traps, which I think was really controversial and we're still kind of experimenting in my opinion, because like it's pretty clear that Caustic doesn't exactly work anymore. And then on the flip side, when Pathfinder started dropping out of the metagame, they added Horizon, who was another option to give your team high ground easily. And you know, that kind of left Pathfinder in the dust even more, but it was a solution. And I don't know if Horizon's really that strong top level, but they at least ran her when she first came out, and they ran her back when Caustic was meta. So maybe this is a little bit of the Caustic meta falling apart. And this is a bit of a side note and kind of speculative, but when they nerfed Caustic and Horizon at the same time, it really did a number for restoring the Gibby meta that Caustic was challenging for a little while back in Season 7, right? I don't know if that's really the purpose or if that's really true, but like it definitely gives credence to the idea that they wanted Gibby to be a little stronger so that Bunker couldn't really be as sustainable or as reliable. But that's exactly the thing, right? If we just do the typical power creep or nerfing, then teams would either have way too much sustain if we replaced Gibby with someone better, or the Caustic Watson Bunker meta would come back. And I think that's what the devs have been afraid of. You know, I think that's why Gibby is so strong right now. And so I think it goes without saying that the solution to this problem has to be a little more creative than usual. Not only because we want to prevent a stale meta from regaining power, but also because people like Gibby, people like that playstyle. You know, you can't just ignore them or drop them. You can't leave them behind, right? And because he's not really cooldown sensitive. Like, you can't just add 10 seconds to his bubble and think it's going to do anything, you know, because they don't care. They only use it once. That's the point. So yeah, the solution to this problem is not quite as simple as it has been in the past. So what else would give players options, not only against Gibby, but to do the things for their team that Gibby does? And like I've said, this does have to get a little more creative than the typical power balancing that would usually work for this game, just because of how much of a linchpin Gibby is in the meta and what he is doing for the metagame as a whole already. So if something like a grenade was able to go, like some type of grenade was able to go through the bubble, ideally not a character ability, because that would kind of contribute to the overcentralization issue that we had with crypto to begin with, right? But if some kind of maybe one rare item could go through the bubble, then it would reduce people's over-reliance on the bubble, for example. Like, it wouldn't be a perfect solution to every scenario in the late rings, right? Or, for example, after Horizon came out, they gave us a suck, which I thought they were never going to put a suck in this game. I'm kind of not a huge fan of a suck being in Apex, a movement shooter. But that's the past, you know? It's in the game. It's a part of the game now. You gotta live with it, right? But if there were boops, a boop could be a huge counterplay for a Gibby bubble, right? Like, you could take up the dominant position in the bubble with the boop. And a boop could really be useful for a ton of different situations in the game. It wouldn't really have to be just to counter Gibby, right? It would be for plenty of things, and it'd just be nice to have against a Gibby. I don't know. That might be a little too Overwatchy. And, you know, this is Overwatchy too, but like if maybe there was a survival item or another defense legend that had like a full like May wall from Overwatch. I mean, I'm just saying, if you had that, then you would have another option for dealing with third parties. You wouldn't have to use the Gibby bubble to isolate a 3v3 from another team across the ridge, for example. I'm just saying, stuff like that is more like pliable and usable by the community, and it doesn't force people to use like one specific character or like one specific play style to deal with Gibby, one specific gun, the EVA 8 Mastiff. Like, I don't know. Y'all should tell me what you think about those ideas, or post your own in the comments, honestly. But it is pretty clearly not as simple as, like, you know, add 5 seconds to cooldown time, because that's just not going to cut it anymore. You know, like, Gibby is important. We can't just get rid of him. We can't just nerf him out of the meta because we need him. But we can't rely on him this heavily because the game just isn't as fun when it's wiggling through bubble shields.
Headshot on him. Got you, bro.
Reloading.
He jumped on my head. He's Cirque du Soleil, bro.
Good work. This one's free. Remember that.